Hi everyone, Samantha Stevens here from the Second Chance Association, and today we've got a treat for you. We've got Leanne Wakeling on with us today, and we're going to be she's going to help encourage us all on really having quality of life. Leanne is a Chief Encouragement Officer, which is awesome. And she loves to empower people to really find a passion and a purpose and really transform themselves. So Leanne comes with 30 years experience, and she's been 4 years as a business owner herself. And today what we're going to do is we're going to discuss two topics. One, how to find your area of genius, and we're really going to break that down. I can't wait to pick your brain, Leanne, about that. And the second one is really building your business plan or your exit plan or your career plan around that genius skill. So let's get right into it. Welcome, Leanne.
Hi, thanks so much for the opportunity. I'm really looking forward to this.
Oh, there's so many people that are going to get breakthroughs. So get your pens and paper ready, everyone. So Leanne and I had a chat before jumping on and recording this, and I was already learning so much. I've got notes written here. So with finding your genius, Leanne, tell me a little bit about that. So when we were talking before about everyone has different areas of genius, and you're giving me some examples of that. Can you break that down to our listeners today on how that looks? Have we got one area of genius? Or I know myself, I like to put a lot of different hats on sometimes. So how does that look?
Well, finding your genius is actually, have you heard of the Japanese term ikagi?
Yeah.
It's where all of those parts come together, and we find our purpose in the middle of that. And one of the things that I love to do is to help people find that for themselves. And if they're not doing that type of work now, it's building a plan on how to get there. And for some people, that might mean doing more training. For others, it might mean stepping out of what they think they're supposed to have been doing so they get to do what they actually want. Because I don't know about you, but there are so many people that I come across who are kind of drifting through life because they're doing what they thought that they should be doing. They're doing what they were good at. But as Jim Collins says in his book, Good to Great, good is not enough. Great requires passion. And you look at, there's the story of Michael Jordan, is that he didn't even make his high school basketball team, but he was so passionate about playing basketball that he practiced and practiced and practiced. It's the energy that keeps us going. So we don't have to be good at it already. If we love it, we'll have the energy to put in the effort to become great. And that's kind of the principle. And that's how I work with people, is to support them to discover what that is going through and finding out, well, okay, how do I like to work? I'm a behavioural and thinking styles profiler. And what the behavioural profiling does is helps to define why we might not be enjoying what we're doing right now. I found very early on that I was often working with people who are like me, who are really people connected type people who are doing very detail-oriented work. They're often behavioural style that's very good at doing what they do, not necessarily great with people. And they get tired because while they're good at it, they're not getting any energy from it. And it's like you get up and you want to stick pins in your eyes because, oh God, I could do anything but this. And that's what I help people do, is to discover that. Sorry, go on.
So I love what you're saying about to be passionate about something is how you become great at it. And what I find with a lot of our listeners is they've gone into a business with a passion and had this big idea. And then they've got staff, they've got tax, they've got BAS, they've got bookwork, they've got all this sort of stuff that they weren't passionate about. And they start to lose that passion for that business, and they start finding themselves overwhelmed. So What would be a tip for these people? What's one thing they could walk away with today in order to tap back into that genius so they can start being passionate again into their business?
Well, it's understanding where to stop.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I first started coaching 4 years ago, like formally being trained as a coach, one of the things that my mentor said was, as soon as you're earning enough money from what you do to pay for somebody else's salary, do it. So as soon as you can afford it, is get your virtual assistant, get your somebody who does that piece of the work that you can't stand now that you've learnt how to do it, because you still need to keep track of it, whatever it is. If it's money, it's so that you have a regular reporting system. It's so that you've got the structures in place in order to be able to keep understanding it, because it's still your responsibility to know what's happening in your business. It's not your responsibility to do everything to make your business work. Yeah. And that's probably the biggest thing. And I notice it perhaps more specifically with women, though I'm sure it happens in anywhere where you're trying to earn a business yourself. I know a couple of years ago, I was working with a young guy, a plumber. He'd come to do plumbing at my place, and he was doing his bookwork as well on the weekend. His whole purpose for working for himself was to get flexibility, and he was spending the weekend doing things that somebody else could do. And my challenge to him was, okay, how much do you get paid for your work? Oh, $210 an hour. Okay, how much will it cost you to have a bookkeeper? $40 to $60 an hour. Is there a value proposition there to actually outsource to somebody and pay them and empower the economy and enable somebody else to earn their income by paying them a third or a quarter of what you get paid to do your work, which will enable you to increase your quality of life? It will alleviate that area that's irritating you and allow you to actually spend the time with the kids, which was the whole purpose for going into business. So yeah, that's what it is. That is outsource sooner rather than later.
And that's the
takeaway
we're talking about, because you and I were talking earlier about scarcity mode, and some people hold on to that fear, right, of being able to let go and let someone else do it. I love that you pointed out that you got to learn it first.
Yes.
And then go pay someone else to do it. And that can be scary as a business owner, because sometimes you're like, yeah, that's fine, but all my expenses are adding up. So I think that's a really good takeaway. The other thing you mentioned was find what you like to do. So how do we tap back into that? How do we remember? We've been in business for a few years. How do we remember what we like to do anymore?
Well, sometimes that's what it is to engage somebody like a business coach or a life coach or a business buddy to help you tap into it. Because one of the things that I also notice, because we get so busy focused on doing, and because most of us that go into business are in my the thinking styles profiling system, they're called dynamos. They're the people that get stuff done. However, when we are so busy nose to the grindstone, we can actually lose our energy and focus of what we started doing this in the first place. And that's one of the challenges that happens, and I've seen it lots, is if you fail to plan, it's not necessarily that you plan to fail, but you certainly are losing the opportunity to continue to enjoy what you're doing and be energized by it. And that's, I don't actually know why people don't like or don't value the opportunity to go back and set and remember why are they doing this in the first place. But Simon Sinek had it pretty much on the thing, is that you got to understand your why, because that's what keeps you motivated. That's what keeps us in touch. And that's what I work with clients to do, because even if they're having trouble with other parts of their business or trying to make life decisions, it's still going back to, what is the vision of the outcome that I want? What's the mission I'm on? What are the standards that I'm living? What are the values that I'm sharing? And what are the attitudes that I need to have in order to make this continue to happen? And it comes from a model that I use called the critical alignment model, that was developed by Sharon Pearson at the Global Success Institute. And it's just a great decision-making tool to be able to reconnect to our core, so that we can actually do the things that we want to be doing and empower others to do what they want. Because you know that finance task that you hate, somebody else, it lights them up. I know people that I think, okay, not my part of ship, and I'm so glad somebody else loves it. My husband and I are like that. He's the data geek. He loves all that stuff, and that's what you need to do, is find your team that creates you all to be doing your joy. And it's possible, because we're out there.
And that would probably really link to you, you being a thinking and behaviour specialist. So I've done one of these myself, so we might break that down a little bit, because I know you mentioned about the dynamo. Is there 4 categories?
Yes.
From memory. Would you recommend that you do this on yourself, but also on your team, so that you're filling all the gaps, sort of thing?
I happen to see the opportunity, but the metadynamics profile, which is the thinking styles, that's more to me of a development tool to look at, well, okay, if you're a business owner and you've recruited someone who's the right fit for your business, but needs development, this is a way of saying, well, okay, this is where I can invest most effectively in order to support them. Because again, like in Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, is you get the right people on the bus, which is values aligned, because it's much easier to train somebody to do a job than it is to get them to align to the values and the mission of the business. So it's where recruitment, we often recruit people the way that we are. And actually, we need to recruit people who fill the gaps of who we are. And that's one of the things that I like about profiling. I actually prefer to use, when selecting, the DISC profile, because it will actually help you align as a business with the people, but it also lets you, as you're building a team, is figure out the gaps. It will actually do a profile of all of the profiles to say, this entity, this team is missing this skill. It allows you to say that, and then you can decide, am I going to recruit to fill that gap? Am I going to train to fill that gap? Am I going to accept that gap and just be aware of it? And so it provides so much information, that it provides a level of comfort to being able to invest wisely in where to put limited resources. Because when we're in startup phase, or certainly in the early phases of business, as you happen to be building a team, it's a really cool way to shortcut into figuring out what's going on.
Yeah. And I think one of the things then you highlighted as well earlier was about understanding your values, and that kind of links. So I guess with doing the DISC, or whichever program they use to identify, that's going to be a great way to communicate with your team, right? Because you're going to be able to understand their way of thinking, and you're going to be able to communicate better so there's no conflict there. And you can really...
Or at least if there is conflict, you know what it is and you know how to resolve it, because you've realised, you know, in the end, we have different motivators. We have, you know, the thing known as selection bias is because we do, and I know I did it for years, is think everybody's the same as us. Well, guess what? No, they're not. And actually it helps with communication. It's helped me a great deal because I was a person of perhaps possibly low social intelligence, which meant that I didn't read other people well. What this did was help me understand, it's not that that person's mad at me. It's actually that they don't understand what I need, but now I understand what they need. I can help them. And that's where I find the power. It certainly reduces the conflict because it takes us away of being worried about ourselves and starts to give us an appreciation of the other's needs. At least that's what I've found.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love it. But really, before all of that, like, first you need to have a team that are all aligned with the same values, and then you go ahead and do that. So let's break down the understanding of values.
Well, values, in my world, values are an emotional state that you want to experience on a consistent basis.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes what can happen is that a business will take a cookie cutter select set of values. Well, it's, to quote my dad, it's about as useful as hip pockets on a singlet. Because if you don't imbibe those values, they're kind of so what? And one of the things that I learned, I do a process with clients called values elicitation, because it makes a huge difference in understanding our values and what is driving us. It's a 3-hour process. I do it over I will break it up into 1, 2 or 3 segments for people who don't necessarily have 3 hours to devote to it. And it actually takes a lot of energy to go through, but it's super influential in sorting out what you really want. And a lot of times we'll have values like honesty and integrity. But when we have those, it's fine, they're core values. But if what you expect from the world is honesty and integrity, it's because you don't trust the world. You're actually wanting these values to be somebody else for you to experience them. And they're actually really poor values as surface level values. They're great core values that you only expect of yourself, that you're not judging others based on whether they have them or not. And so you actually want other people to have values that align to yours. So it might be, in business, it might be service, where you're driven to serve others. It might be discipline, where you're designed to be, or tenacious, or they're more productive kind of values that individuals can do without reliance on somebody else meeting them. I trust that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I guess the question to you would be, so once I've understood my value, and really it needs to be measurable because you're putting it into the workplace, then would I put a KPI along that? So, for example, if it was service and I owned a cafe, would I put a KPI on that and really build the team that we're all aligning with that value consistently? Because sometimes I find I've owned lots of businesses. I still own a few businesses. What I find with staff is we may have a certain amount of values, but it's that consistency of reminding us what that value is, so we're all on the same page. So what's the tip to do that? Would it be a KPI thing, or what would you suggest?
Well, it's defining it. So for me, it's coming back to, you've got these values. What's the vision for the business, and what's the mission that the team is on? And when the team is aligned to the mission, the values, if you've specified and defined the values, it's, yes, you can have a KPI, but what is that KPI? What does that look like? And actually, for every business, it's likely to look a little different, because what service means to me and how it's being met at a high level is different. It's amongst the things is then in the second level of the critical alignment model, which is the model that I was mentioning, where you have at the environment as your mission, vision, values, is if you have KPIs, you need a benchmark. You can't just pluck figure out of the air and say, okay, this is what we're going to do, because how do you actually know that's even a viable thing? And just because you're super tenacious doesn't mean that everybody has to be super tenacious, unless that's the industry standard, the benchmark that you're aiming towards. Because it's a hiding to nowhere if you keep on setting high expectations without really a reality check on what is reasonable. And what is reasonable is setting a benchmark that somebody else already has. So it's where you look at industry standards and you build a performance expectation based on existing evidence, because there aren't too many businesses that certainly would be in our realm that are dealing in virgin territory. You know, it's what do you want? Hey, talking about virgin territory, it might be about Richard Branson's standards for his team at Virgin. But it's in his organisation, it's not the customer is right. It's that the team is right. They're the taken care of first. And in taking care of them, they then have the desire to take care of the people. And it's working out that what is most important. And if your team is important to you and you treat them accordingly, chances are they'll treat your customers and your clients well because they're treated well.
Great. That's a great note to finish up on finding your genius. We've had some huge hot tips here. So just to summarize, finding your genius, we've discussed in today how to really unblock out of that scarcity mode. We've discussed finding what you like to do and what you're good at, and identifying that with using thinking and behavior sort of ideas and sheets behind that. We've understood our values and how that looks. I love that we've sort of touched on staff and setting benchmarks, and then on that is really thinking about what do you want and looking at what's important, so checking in with yourself. And then to marry it all up, what I've written here is support your people in what they love to do. So, and then your number one was here, remember your vision, get clear on it, remember your mission, and understand your value. And then you're going to have this flow. So I think they're 3 really good tips. In our next series with Leanne, we're going to be discussing, which will follow on from this, your business plan. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for Leanne. Thank you, Leanne. You can find Leanne at lginspires.com.au. We're going to also have the links below if you want to discuss more or have wanting to maybe put in some business profiling and thinking techniques. Reach out to Leanne and she'll help you there. And we'll see you on the next training call.
Thank you.